Welcome to Hometown Cable. The program's called What's Going On Here. I'm John. I'm not John. I'm Bob Venn. This is John O'Hara. I'm going to forget it. John O'Hara on my left. And John, what is your title?
I'm the agent in charge for customs investigations here at Rouse's Point, New York.
Okay, if you watched our program, the 21st and the 28th, you know we were talking with the I&C, the Inspection and Control. Then we talked to the it used to be Classification and Value, got a new name now, which it's on the tip of my tongue. And now we're into that third big branch up here, and that's the Office of Investigation. Still call that Office of Investigation?
It's called Office of Enforcement, with investigations being the main responsibility.
Okay. First they investigate, then you enforce.
That's correct.
Boy, do you enforce.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so they're located in the Rouse's Point building on the second floor. And John, you've been with. Tell us a little bit about John O'Hara before we start. You were born where, and what's
Well, my
happened?
hometown is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I still have family and relatives in Philadelphia. I have a son who's a deputy sheriff in Alexandria, Virginia. My wife and I, Mary Ann, live in Alburg, Vermont. We've been there since 1982, when we came up from Baltimore, Maryland. I've been with the Customs Service for 35 years. I've been in federal government for 38 years. And I'm preparing to bring it all to an end, April of this year. I'm going to retire.
Okay, now, you got through that with 35 years too quick. You an inspector first, were you? When did you come in?
No, I came into the Customs Service in Philadelphia as a personnel assistant to the Collector of Customs at that time. And then from Collector of Customs, position with the Collector of Customs, I transferred to Baltimore, Maryland as a Customs Patrol Officer. From Customs Patrol Officer in Baltimore, I transferred back to another Patrol Officer position in Philadelphia. Stayed in Philadelphia as a Patrol Officer, Supervisory Patrol Officer, till 1968. In 1968, I transferred up here as a customs agent to Rouse's Point, New York. I was here in 1968 through 1972. The end of 72, I was promoted to what we called in the service as Air Security Coordinator, which basically was a supervisor in charge of the air security program, which was responsible for furnishing sky marshals on U.S. airplanes, and we flew around the world. In that capacity, working out of the Washington Dulles Airport office, I exercised control over Dulles International Airport, Washington National Airport, Baltimore Washington International Airport, and Philadelphia International Airport. That program phased out in 1973, 74, and I transferred into the Baltimore region as a regional patrol director. And in that capacity, we handled almost the entire mid-Atlantic area of the United States: Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Virginia. In 1982, I was transferred from Baltimore up here to Rouse's Point as the special agent in charge, buying a home in Alburg. And as I said, we've been here in Rouse's Point since '82, and I've enjoyed it. And I'd do it all over again, Bob, if I had to.
Yeah, a very pleasant person, very, very pleasant and easy to get along with. He worked with a lot of the agencies. He worked with the Customs, the Immigration, State Police, City Police, and a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
John, just this past week, we heard in the TV and we saw in the paper that there was a hijacking of an airplane. Mm-hmm. And flew into USA. When you were working with the undercover, what did you call it? Sky Marshal. What did you do as a Sky Marshal? People probably wonder, they talk about, you carried a gun onto the plane?
Oh yeah, it was a very interesting assignment. We flew only on U.S.-owned aircraft. I, in particular, flew Pan American Airlines. and we flew around the world. It was our responsibility to keep those aircrafts from being hijacked. If you recall, back in the early 70s, we had the Palestinians, the Al Fatah, hijack American aircraft and some other foreign country aircraft too, but particularly American aircraft, and they were taken to the desert in Libya and Egypt and, of course, blown up. It was the United States' attempt to stop that kind of a thing and safeguard the traveling American citizens around the world. And we did that. Once we implemented the air security program, put sky marshals on board the aircraft, we were successful in screening and maintaining security of these aircraft. We only lost one aircraft to a hijacker, and that was out of New York City, JFK. The hijacker flew the aircraft to Cuba.
John, was there more than one sky marshal on a plane?
Oh yeah, there were a number of sky marshals assigned to fly each plane. A minimum of 2, depending on the size of the aircraft, and a maximum of 4 officially on the aircraft. But sometimes you had as many as 6 or 8.
Wow.
Because they would overlap, and you would be into the area what we used to refer to as Hijack Alley, and they were the flights between Beirut, Turkey, Egypt, and Israel.
Now, did everybody on the plane, all the personnel, know who you were and that you were on that plane?
No, we were on the aircraft in an undercover capacity, assuming the identity of businessmen or travelers and so on.
Not even the pilot knew?
Well, the pilot did know. We were mandated to brief with the crew, the entire crew, pilot, co-pilot, stewardesses, prior to takeoff. They were aware of our seat assignments, and they were the only ones. In the event there was a situation developed on the aircraft, then they knew where to go and whom to summon for a response at the time.
Okay. Interesting. A lot of riding.
A lot of riding. Some of the schedules were in and out of London, into London in the morning, out in the afternoon.
Okay. John, we went over the organization of customs in the district, that they are under the district director, William Dietzel in Ogdensburg, and we mentioned that we were talking with Jeff Waldron, that you are not under that supervision of the district director. Is that correct?
That's correct. This office reports to the special agent in charge in Buffalo, New York. The special agent in charge in Buffalo, New York reports directly to an assistant commissioner in Washington, D.C.
That's not to say that you don't work very closely with the I&C in the old C&V department. Yes. Now, your personnel, how many men do you have, or how many people?
We have 10 people here at this office.
10, including yourself?
Yeah.
All right.
Some of them are vacancies. We don't have them all filled. We're not up to staff.
And your people are traveling a lot, obviously.
Travel, correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is it known in the public who your people are, or is that undercover? Not undercover, but you just don't advertise who works for you?
We don't make it a policy of advertising and identifying in photographs or on film our particular agents, because they can be called upon from time to time to work in an undercover capacity.
Okay.
So we don't usually have anybody appear before the media unless it's a supervisor or a manager.
Okay. The reason I'm mentioning this to start off is that if you wonder why he's the only one that's going to be talking to us, and maybe one or two, is because he's not hogging the camera. They just don't want people on camera because they do some undercover work.
That's correct.
Now you are also under the Treasury Department.
The Treasury
Department. Many people out there have seen your television program called O'Hara, U.S. Treasury. Now, how long were you on that show, John?
Well, wasn't quite my show, but this goes back quite a few years. I can't recall the date at this time, but they implemented a show called O'Hara U.S. Treasury, and it was produced by Jack Webb Enterprises. And after they had produced the show, they researched the listing of people working within the United States Treasury Department, and they came up with 2 individuals working as investigators for the United States Treasury. One was with IRS in the New York area. However, his name was not John, and initially that program was set as John O'Hara, and I was the only John O'Hara with the United States Treasury, so I had to sign a release for Jack Webb Enterprises, so they could use my name in that show. And they did use authentic customs cases. And if you would grant me the liberty, I can show you a check that I had received from the television network indicating that it was in payment.
They paid you. Hey, we'll take a break here for a short, and when we come back, we'll see that check. I want to make sure that the people don't realize where that big check is hidden. Be right back. Please stay tuned.
It's $1.
Thanks for waiting. We're back, John, and we found the big check. I don't know why you hid it. Tell us about this check again now. You've never cashed it.
In the form of consideration for allowing them to use my name, they had to give me some money. So they wrote a check in the amount of $1 to John O'Hara.
Makes it legal, huh?
Which makes it legal, and I released the use of my name to.
But you didn't get that.
TV series.
You didn't get that easily. May I read this letter attached?
Yes, certainly.
December 13th, 1976, from Universal. In response to your letter, Mr. O'Hara, I am sorry to hear of your claim that you had not previously received your $1. I was under the impression that the dollar had previously been paid to you by us or by agent Semderov. Unfortunately, my records are not available to check back that far. In any event, you will find attached Universal City Studios check number 246706 in the amount of $1 made payable to you. And they don't say it, but they said don't write to us again, probably. This is from Chris Lucky. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. O'Hara, U.S. Treasury. That's still on TV, by the way. It was on last Saturday morning.
Well, they're reruns, Bob.
Yeah, the reruns. Well, talking about reruns.
I feel like a rerun.
We were just talking to a BCI man that came in here while we took the break, and he was saying that you're quite a rerun yourself. Okay, well, while we were off also, John took out this framed, I don't know, he's inside of here, and he's pointed it out to me. I'll leave it up here, and I'll try to point to it. It's his official passport on the bottom.
Correct.
To show he was representing the U.S. government in case he was stopped carrying a gun on the plane before they would shoot him. And then later, when they wore uniforms and checked at the airport, certain people, they had security officer badges for customs. This was his ID card, his business card, and this was one of the original signs that was up in the...
Was at the counter in front of the Pan American Airlines in Washington Dulles Airport.
It's a crime to carry concealed weapons. Well, didn't you have to go through the metal detector when you were...
Yes.
How did you get through with your gun on you?
Well, we carried guns on one hip, and pinned to the inside of our coat was our Pan American ID card. So that when we opened up our coat, the security people saw our ID card at the same time they saw our weapon,
okay.
and it
no
defused the situation.
Right away. All right. Okay.
Which also was the problem when we were in foreign countries, Europe and so on.
Uh-huh. Ever have any interesting, that sounds like an interesting little bit to go off here, any interesting dangerous situations while you were traveling yourself?
Never had a dangerous situation. I had a situation develop flying from JFK to London Heathrow one time where I was in the upper section of a 747, and in the upper lounge of the 747 is the only way you can gain access to the pilot's cockpit. So you have to come through the lounge to get to the pilot's cockpit, and I was on position in the lounge when an individual came into the lounge and immediately proceeded to the door of the cockpit. And needless to say, I reacted by grabbing the individual by the back of his coat and identifying myself as a sky marshal as I placed him up against the bulkhead of the aircraft and proceeded to search him. And he informed me that he was what they referred to as a deadheading crew member of 4 Pan American Airlines, trying to make a flight connection at another city location to pilot a plane to some other location. Well, those pilots and those crew that were deadheading were instructed that they were to confer with the crew and the sky marshals prior to boarding, so that we knew who deadheading crew members were. This pilot apparently had arrived at the airport late and failed to do that. So we had to have the pilot come out of the cockpit and identify him as a pilot of Pan American and Of course, the situation was immediately diffused.
Now, John, this was in view of the other people, passengers, right?
Yes, that's true.
There must be quite a reaction or a thing like that right there?
Well, the reason I hollered out, everybody in the lounge could hear, was to identify myself
You hollered out?
as a sky marshal. Certainly,
Sure, because you look
Sure.
like you'd be the opposite.
Well, I mean, because I had badge in one hand at the time and gun in the other.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
the gun was out. The gun was not in the holster. It was in a situation
Yeah.
where I couldn't wait to see if this man was armed or unarmed at the time. And of course, the stewardess knew who I was, and she helped to ease off the situation and calm everybody down.
Okay, we'll get back to the present maybe here. This office has sub-offices. First of all, what territory does the Rouse's Point Special Agent in Charge cover? What area do you cover?
Well, prior to October of last year, of '92, we covered a large majority of New England. We covered the state of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and of course the northern tier of New York. However, in October of last year, we underwent a reorganization. Those offices were taken away from us, so that now the office here at Rouse's Point just controls the area of northern New York, stretching from Lake Champlain to Watertown, New York, and as far south as Glens Falls, New York.
And what about the offices in Vermont now? Are they?
They report to Boston, Massachusetts.
Directly?
Directly.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. What are the functions of the agency now here? What type of things do you cover?
We're to investigate violations of the Tariff Act, which are either criminal or civil in nature. People who basically are attempting to defraud the government of revenue are subject to arrest if the circumstances warrant it. And of course, in those situations where contraband is being smuggled, and the most common type of contraband, of course, is narcotics. It's our responsibility to investigate those smuggling ventures and arrest the individuals, take them to federal court and prosecute them, and hopefully end up with a successful prosecution.
Is it safe to say, John, that most of your work is referred to you and you don't get it while it's happening?
Yeah, we're a reaction type of agency. Most of our reaction investigative cases come from the other elements of customs, our customs inspectors force and our import specialists, individuals who mostly refer to us those cases of fraud. Customs inspectors refer mostly contraband cases.
Mm-hmm. All right. You got to realize that I know a lot more than I can talk with John about his office, because I worked with Customs for nearly 30 years, and some of the things that they are not for the public. So if something I ask you that I shouldn't, you just remind me that
Right, Bob.
you like to do that in the first place. So that'll be all right.
All right.
John, at one time, what is now the Drug Enforcement, what's that called? The
Drug Enforcement Administration,
the DEA was
they call
part of this office. There was no DEA, is that correct? At one
That's
time?
correct.
It was all part of this office when,
Yeah, that's
let's say,
correct.
25 years ago?
Yes, that's correct. Back in 1973, all right, the United States Customs Service lost their responsibility to investigate drug smuggling along the borders. It was transferred to the newly created Drug Enforcement Administration, who comes under the Justice Department, the Attorney General.
And it's still separate today?
And it is still separate today. However, we have been given leeway by the Drug Enforcement Administration to now investigate those cases along the border, because the drug problem has gotten so far out of hand that it takes the resources of just about every federal agency to become involved in combating the drug problem.
So in addition to the actual smuggling portion and the drugs and the narcotics, there's also a revenue protecting portion of your office, like the import specialists refer a case where someone is shortchanging the government by duty, by making false invoicing and so forth.
Correct.
Do you have a certain group in your office that covers those cases only?
Well, no, we're a small unit, and because we are a small investigative unit, every agent assigned to the office must carry cases of all aspects to some degree. Some a little heavier than others, but in cases of fraud, we have fraud cases assigned to every agent in the office. However, we do not have drug investigative cases assigned to every agent, but we do have a lot of fraud work that's generated out of this office, and basically that comes to us as referrals from commercial operations, the import specialist group.
John, you do not travel in marked cars most of the time, is that correct?
That's correct.
So you wouldn't know, and you're wearing your uniform now. You don't have uniforms as such.
Uniform of the day.
Some are working in dungarees and whatever. They're out there working, and they're working undercover. Do you work 24 hours a day? Is there 24-hour day people on duty all the time?
No, we work a standard 8-hour shift, 40-hour week, but all the agents are subject to call 24 hours a day, so that with the customs inspectors who do work 24 hours at the major ports around the clock, if they uncover a violation of the customs law, they call a special agent through systems, through radio system, through pager system, who's probably at home or can be out at dinner, and it's his responsibility to respond to that particular port of call.
So it's not, on any given night, it wouldn't be everybody subject to call, just certain people assigned to certain nights?
We work
like a doctor on call?
That's great. We work out a duty roster in order to make it fair to everybody involved.
Okay. Training, John. Well, first of all, you hire very few people off the street to go with the Office of Investigation. Office Enforcement.
Up until October of last year, I had the authority to exercise employment responsibility. I no longer have that, all right? It's been relegated to our Washington, D.C. office. They do the hiring. And of late, it's been their policy to hire off the street.
Oh.
But you're right, Bob. In the past, it was not the policy of this office or my policy to hire off the street. And the only reason we did that in our particular position was that customs investigators are dependent on customs laws, regulations, and policies. The only way you can become trained in that is to work in that capacity. So usually we selected a customs inspector or a customs import specialist to fill one of our investigative positions. And I might add that it's turned out very well for this office. We've been extremely successful and very productive, and I credit that to the fact that it's well-trained special agents.
You've been a very active office along the border?
Yes,
one of the,
very active.
More so lately, if you read in the papers, of course, that's what we see about the drugs. You don't hear about it other than that. And we're not here to talk about any one case. We can't do that. I don't think there's nothing you can talk about. Is there any case that has been settled you could talk about?
Well, we just culminated a case which made the press last fall. We arrested 3 individuals in Plattsburgh, New York, who were attempting to smuggle from the United States into Canada a quantity of heroin and a quantity of opium. We just successfully convicted all 3 of those defendants at a 3-week trial in Albany, New York.
So the people here goes down to testify, correct?
That's correct.
And all of the items that are used in the court have to be locked under lock and key and have to be...
All the evidence that's required has to be locked up.
Are you trained on how to react at a trial? Do you go through training?
That's part of our training, which is given in Glencoe, and of course we go through refresher training at various locations. Now we also have a new facility in Miranda, New Mexico, and that's a training facility. But so are your customs inspectors. When they go through their training facility at Glencoe, they're also given training in testifying in court.
Okay, well, while they're testifying, and we're getting some more evidence here, we will take a short break and be right back. You're watching Hometown Cable. What's going on here? Every Sunday, and we're talking with John O'Hara. He is the officer in charge at the Office of Enforcement, U.S. Customs, Rouse's Point, New York, for at least 2 more months. Then he's going the way of Bob Venn and the others are going to enjoy his retirement, right, John?
I certainly hope so.
Do some fishing on the Lake Champlain.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks for tuning in to Hometown Cable.
1 to 3
You
hours.
won't want to. John, you said you were here back in '68.
That's correct, Bob.
Were you here when the shooting occurred?
Yes, I was. I was the investigative agent in that case.
Well, tell us a little bit about that shooting. I mentioned it, when we were doing a story with Albert Morelli, he mentioned the shooting over there. Can you just give us a little bit of the first-hand knowledge about that shooting? It was, I think it's what brought the guns on the Canadian border for inspectors, right?
That's what armed the customs inspectors
Right.
back in 1970, okay?
Yep.
On the southern border of the United States, between the United States and Mexico, Customs had instituted Operation Intercept, and they were searching 100% of all vehicles coming in from Mexico. So at that time, we were advised by Washington headquarters to be on the alert of perhaps smuggling groups, organizations coming around our flanks, entering the United States through Canada. So it resulted in an intensified examination program along the Canadian border. And at Champlain, New York, we had a very intensive program. We were examining 100% of the people off the buses. The Greyhound buses from Montreal to New York City were examined quite thoroughly. And during one of these examinations, an individual was taken off of the bus together with his baggage. The baggage was opened up outside on an examination table, and mixed in with this individual's suitcase were items of, they related to Cuba and Che Guevara, the communist movement through the Caribbean, Central and South America. The inspector realized that he possibly had somebody other than a normal traveler. So he was referred inside the old border station.
That's what I want to mention. This is back when we had the old station, completely different than what you saw on our TV last week when we showed you the building.
It's
Go ahead.
changed.
It sure has.
Correct.
Okay.
So this individual was escorted into the building, and a more thorough examination was conducted. When the inspectors began the thorough examination, they called the duty agent, okay? And the agent that was on call at that time was Leonard Chagnon, who lives here in Champlain. Leonard responded to the port, and at that time found in the traveler's suitcase was a map and a notebook which indicated various hideouts, weapon stashes, armament stashes in Montreal and throughout a greater part of Canada. That information was eventually relayed up to the Canadian authorities. But Leonard Chagnon, responding to that particular call, came to Champlain, New York, proceeded to pat down the suspect. The suspect became annoyed, infuriated, and actually concealed within and under his coat was a .38 revolver, which he pulled from underneath his coat. He shot the agent, Leonard Chagnon, twice. He shot two other customs inspectors who were wounded, and he shot and missed Supervisory Inspector Frank Cavanaugh. The weapon only held 5 rounds, and he had fired all 5 rounds. He escaped out of the building and retreated easterly across the highway and into that swampy area.
Does that sound like a government man talking when he escaped easterly? He doesn't say he went out. He got easterly. I just want to bring that out, John. If anybody else didn't pick that up, I did. By the way, the only person in that whole building, and there were probably 8 people in the building at that hour, the only one that had a gun was the agent.
Special agent.
Special agent was the only one that had a gun, and he's down with 2 bullets in him, and all the other people had were staple guns. That's all they had, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
People were literally diving under desks,
yes,
under counters, trying to escape the aim of this individual. They not knowing that whether he was able to reload or how many rounds the gun held.
Right.
So when he did escape, his escape route was marked by a Canadian truck driver.
Easterly. Okay, now go on. You go ahead.
Easterly. That is towards Rouse's point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure a bus go.
Right. But still on the American side.
On the American side, and we did pursue him towards the Meridian Road.
Hmm.
Meridian
The
Road.
extension of Oak Street, as we know it.
Correct,
Up there. Okay.
from Champlain.
Yes.
And we, at that time, had the New York State Police who had responded to a call. Also responding at the time were various medical units from fire departments, ambulances, and so on, because after all, we had had 3 injured, 3 shot, and they had to be taken down to the hospital in Plattsburgh. The individual who did the shooting went into Canada. He crossed over the line, went into Canada. We, pursuing him, never found him on our original search. However, during a search, we did hear a shot.
You were out in that search, John?
I
You
was
were
out
out
there.
there.
I was out there. It was
Yeah.
about 2 o'clock in the morning. And Paul Gravelin, another agent from this office, myself, and two New York State troopers were pursuing this individual. We never found him.
Was Paul an agent at that time? No. he
Paul was a
inspector-
customs inspector at the
that
time.
right?
And he had a weapon which he had removed from the body of shot and wounded Lynn Shogman.
Mm-hmm.
He took his service revolver and pursued the violator at that time. We did not find the guy at the time, but we did find out afterwards that he committed suicide. And however, his body was in Canada, which meant jurisdiction then belonged to Canadian authorities. The Quebec Provincial Police handled the whole investigation. And I can remember when we sent that investigation down to Washington, it was in a box, 2 foot long and about 12 inches high. That's how much paperwork was involved in that case. Fingerprints, statements, photographs, diagrams, and so on. We were very fortunate. None of the people who were shot died. They were injured for quite a long time. Some of them, Leonard received a disability from the government for his wounds. He was shot in the lung and in the stomach.
Leonard retired 10 or more years ago.
Yes,
Did you follow him?
I followed Leonard into this position.
And this position, he became the officer in charge
Correct,
here
yeah.
8-10 years after he was shot. Then, because of that, the inspectors thought there should be some protection along the border, right, as far as guns?
That's correct. They raised the issue that because of the type of individuals that were crossing our borders, and the inspectors being exposed to these elements, were in fear of their life. And of course, this brought that out. So they did petition Washington to have them armed, and eventually the customs inspectors were furnished weapons, do qualify with them, and today do carry service revolvers, and that was the reason why they eventually were armed. That particular case.
You know, there's a lot of things going on this border here that you people come through and cross the border out there. I say you people, all the people who are watching, don't realize the city of Montreal, although it's not a violent city, there's a lot of crime. There's a lot of rough people coming through this border, right?
You know, when you take Champlain, which is the main border crossing on Interstate 87, Interstate 87 is the main artery between New York City to the south and Montreal to the north. Both cities having a high crime rate.
Right.
And it's very easy for these people to jump in a car and cross that border. The Canadians are exposed to them, and U.S. Customs are exposed.
You know, about 8 or 9 years ago, I went up to Canada to call on a shipper, and went up with the customs broker. We went up to visit him, and first thing I did when we went in, he said to me, before we get into my business, he said, I'd like to ask you a question, what I can do, maybe you could help me. He said, I had two of my trucks have been stopped over in Highgate, Vermont. This was probably your jurisdiction. And he said they've been stopped over there, and he said they're holding my trucks because they found 11, I think they were Haitians. I don't know if you remember this case. He said his merchandise was being shipped. It was a paper product. They were big rolls. And he said they were covered with a canvas. They were standing up, and they had a canvas over them. And one of the inspectors, wasn't looking for anything, but he noticed the load a little wider than usual. He said, something's wrong. Why is it so wide? So he said he had him tear the canvas back. And in between the rolls, which would used to be tied together, they had a 3 or more foot space, and there were 6 on one load and 5 on the others in between the rolls back there, hiding. Now, this type of thing happens, John?
Still happens. The Border Patrol, of course, between ports of entry.
That's an immigration violation, right?
Is right. The immigration are concerned about people, and they're making sure that non-U.S. citizens enter into the country legally. And there is a large, profitable market out there to smuggle people into the United States, and immigration has to deal with that problem.
Right, John. Let me ask you here for direction now. Tell us something that you think that somebody out there who doesn't know much about what we're talking about would find interesting. It's not the most interesting to sit and watch two people talk. We don't have much that we can show you as far as things that we can. We got a cup here that says Treasury John on it, but except for that, we don't have much for props this morning. So we got to watch your smiling face. Think of something that you want to tell me about and get me started.
Well,
an interesting case that you were very involved with over the years up here, maybe.
Let me backtrack here a little bit too on the shooting case.
Yes.
Of the 2 customs inspectors and the special agent back in 1970. An incident that happened in that particular case, I'm sure very few people know about or know that it did happen, and it really was. It goes a long way to showing how brotherly the Canadians are, and I'll explain that by telling you when the customs inspectors were shot and the agent was shot. It was necessary to rush these people down to the hospital. There was a need for blood in these cases. The special agent lost a tremendous amount of blood, having been shot twice. So we needed an immediate source of blood donors. There wasn't a lot of blood in the bank in Plattsburgh at the time. There was a trucking company in operation at that time, and I believe it's no longer in business, but it was Maisland Trucking. And that night, coming through the port of entry was one of its owners, Sam Maisland. When he became informed of the situation, he contacted his truck dispatcher, whose office was located on the west side of the interstate at the time. He was in radio contact with the Maisland trucks. He had the Maisland truck drivers check their union card, because on each of the union cards, they had the blood type. Every truck driver that had the same blood type as the agent was instructed to turn his truck in at the terminal, and they would take him to Plattsburgh so he could donate blood. There was a quick supply of blood, and I don't know whether that saved the agent's life, but it certainly contributed towards it. Those truck drivers could have said, well, I'm not really in the mood to donate blood, and Mr. Sam Maisland didn't have to suggest it, and they did. And that was a Canadian doing it to help a citizen of the United States.
I've never heard this before, but you people who around the area, northern tier, have been the beneficiary of a lot of things that Sam Maisland did for our area. The truck bed that we used for the bazaar for 10, 12, 15 years in front of the church at St. Mary's was donated by Sam Maisland. The canvases we had for the first 10 or 12 years to cover our booths before we had permanent booths were all supplied by Sam Maisland and Maisland Trucking. When the Andrews sisters came back to Champlain, there was virtue of Sam Maisland and the Maisland Trucking. The hockey players that appeared in our parade as our what we call the leader of our parade, were all contacted for and furnished by Sam Maisland and his brother and the trucking company. Done an awful lot, and we miss Maisland. They built the Port of Champlain with their trucking company way back, and of course it's gone on from there.
Huge trucking
and
company.
I'm glad you brought that up, John. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back, and we're going to find out what happens to some of the things that are seized from these people. When you seize money, when you seize drugs, you can't just put it in your own bank account. You can't just leave it around forever. Something's got to happen to that money. Something's got to happen to those drugs. Something's got to happen to the guns you confiscate.
Correct.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure can, Bob.
We'll be back. Thanks for tuning in. And stay with us. What's going on here? John O'Hara is our guest this morning. And a smiling John O'Hara. We only had 2 more months to, because he's going to retire.
I smile all the time, though, Bob.
John, we're going to talk a little bit about the things you confiscate and customs confiscates and so forth, and what happens to them. And just off camera, you wanted to tell me also before we get into this about the O'Hara name didn't start with John with customs.
No, that's correct, Bob. My grandfather was a customs inspector in the port of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he retired as a customs inspector from Philadelphia. One of the interesting things, of course, this goes back a long way. It goes back through and during the time of Prohibition. My grandfather was an inspector, and during those early years, there was one particular assignment that he remembered for a long time, and he had been successful in putting it to film because my grandfather always carried a camera with him when he worked. Every day of his life, he worked on the job. He carried a camera, and one day he had an assignment to be a boarding inspector, and he was the boarding inspector for the airship Hindenburg on its maiden flight into Lakehurst, New Jersey.
1937?
And he had pictures of the Hindenburg as it was about to arrive in Lakehurst and caught on fire and the people dropping from the Zeppelin. And he always remembered that incident, not fondly, of course, with tragic in his heart. Unfortunately, the film and the pictures were lost in a fire that we had in our house back in '72.
Yeah. You know, John, I have heard several times that's a great 3 minutes when the man was talking about the Hindenburg coming in, and then he's crying nearly as he's a radio announcer explaining to this. As this Hindenburg is the one that touched the tower as it came into Lyndhurst, New Jersey. Someone out there is going to ask me, I know, why didn't you ask him what a custom inspector does in Philadelphia when everybody who's an inspector works on a border, and there's no border in Philadelphia? What's an inspector do in Philadelphia?
Well, the border in Philadelphia is the Delaware River, and up the Delaware River come ships from all foreign countries. And as these ships arrived in Philadelphia, they were required to be boarded by a customs inspector, and he performed that function in the port of Philadelphia. You have cargo ships, you have ships carrying grain, you have ships carrying oil, a lot of commodities, just as the trucks carry them across the border here into your major seaports like New York and Philadelphia and Boston, Baltimore. The ships carry those cargoes, and you do have customs inspectors, special agents, import specialists, performing similar functions in the large metropolitan cities, just as they do up here on the land border.
And you also, of course, have planes coming in, correct?
At the international airports. That's really...
John, many people who have been trained and came through the Rouse's Point office have gone on to bigger and better things in customs. I'm thinking of someone in particular, and I just lost his name. I think he's also in charge in Newark.
Well, there was an agent assigned here for a long period of time. His name was Mercier.
That's him.
Rick Mercier.
Rick Mercier.
Okay. Rick Mercier, you're right, was in Newark, was in New York City, and now more recently is a division director in our Washington, D.C. office.
Was trained under some nice people, and was trained under Len Shagan, the man who was shot as the agent over in Champlain, as a matter of fact. And was here when you were here parts of the time, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And by the way, Rick Mercier was a sky marshal.
All right.
That's how he came into customs, as a sky marshal.
Oh, he came in as a sky marshal.
That's correct.
Yeah, George Marnes from Rouse's Point, who's now an inspector,
Also sky marshal.
came in as a sky marshal.
That's correct.
There were a lot of openings. They took a lot of those people off the streets, right?
Yes,
So to
they
speak.
did.
When I say off the street, I don't mean that to be derogatory. I mean that you didn't come up through another agency. You started there. It's not easy to get in to customs jobs right off. Say, I'd like to get a job and come in and walk in. They usually come. It's promotions along the way.
That's correct.
Like yourself, you started as a clerk, you said?
As a personnel assistant.
Personnel assistant.
But prior to that, I was working for the Department of the Navy in Philadelphia as a clerk, typist, stenographer.
You're an old person. You're older than you look, John.
I go back a ways, Bob.
But you've enjoyed your service very much.
Oh, I do it all over again. I think we have the greatest agency in the federal government.
But it's time.
It's time to go.
It's time. I love my job, but I enjoy what I'm doing now. I enjoy having my time free. It'd be 5 years Very soon. Time flies, John.
Because-
And you won't have as much time as you do now. You're going to have to manage your time.
All right.
All right, getting back now to the what happens to things that are seized. From cars to guns to drugs and money. What happens to that stuff?
Well, we can take them one at a time.
Okay.
When we seize drugs, basically we find no legal purpose for drugs. We don't turn them over to pharmaceutical firms or anything like that. They're transferred to the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, laboratory.
Is this immediately after you see
No,
them?
we maintain them, of course, if they have to be used as evidence in trials. And then once the trial has been concluded, the narcotics, the cocaine, the heroin, marijuana, are then transferred to the Drug Enforcement Administration's laboratory in New York City. There, they're destroyed, and they burn some of the narcotics. They mix them with other chemical ingredients to do them, and that's basically how they get rid of the narcotics that we do seize. Weapons are another thing. If we seize guns for illegal violation of the law, they're transported to our laboratories, and at those locations they're usually cut to pieces so that they cannot be reassembled, and then they're destroyed. Some of them are remelted into metal and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we do with weapons. When we deal with items such as jewelry,
Yes.
jewelry has been seized. If it has been smuggled, it was brought in illegally, not a question of an attempt to defraud us by paying a lesser duty. But if it's smuggled, Customs will, in so many opportunities, offer that up for sale at a public auction, and people given an opportunity to bid on that.
Yeah.
Customs employees are
Right.
not allowed
Yes.
to bid at those auctions.
Immigration can bid.
Immigration
can bid. General
But-
Services, I think,
correct.
can bid. Customs employees can't bid. I remember back years ago, I wanted to bid on a Cadillac car that had come through, and they said there was no way. And I tried every which way, and I would have given more money than it went for. It went to a person at the air base in Plattsburgh, and it was a car that I just thought I would like to have. But I can see where it would look very good for the guy to lose his car and see it parked in the yard every day when he comes through. You'd think I placed an order for
That's
it.
true.
Pretty
That's
near, right? Now, let's save money to last, John, but let's say now cars. Now, first of all, the auction. The auction used to be held in Champlain whenever the merchandise got a big enough pile to have an auction. And you would buy one piece or 20 pieces, 50 pieces, whatever the lot was. Later, it's now sent all to a central location, I believe, and there's an auction held in New York or somewhere else.
That's correct.
The cars we used to also sell. I was one of the auctioneers with my supervisor, Rodney Ralston, and we'd either have a sealed bid some years, other years you'd go and actually have an auction, 8, 10, 12 cars. Today, that's different. Tell us about what happens today.
Well, what's happened today is that the United States Customs Service is seizing so many items, so many commodities, that we now hire a private firm to handle all this seized merchandise and to liquidate it for us. They auction it, they sell it off, they perform, they do all those functions. They'll advertise in the newspapers, they'll put flyers out. We're about to have a large auction in Champlain, New York, but the cars have been seized all along the Canadian border over to New Hampshire or over to almost to Buffalo. They'll centralize them here at Champlain or maybe even over at Syracuse, New York, and sell them in public auction. They do the same thing with other commodities, be they Iranian rugs, which are prohibited from importing at this time, but are of a high value item. They may feel, well, we'll draw, certain bids and certain items will draw more money if they're in a different large metropolitan area. So, they'll ship those items to the Albany area, to the New York City area, to the Boston area, centralize it, put it all up for bid, and do it. We seize boats, we seize airplanes. They're all handled the same way. It's under contract to a private firm.
Years ago, the idea was not to raise a lot of money. That wasn't the reason to have the auctions. They didn't really... I said, if we broke it down into smaller lots, we'd get more money. They said our function is not to raise the money. It's to get rid of the merchandise that we have seized because of a violation of a law. the cars that are seized by the Immigration Service are sold by them at a different thing. It's not part of the customs
Separate
group.
auction.
Remember, as we told you before, there's immigration and customs both at border crossings. They're two separate entities. One's under the Department of Justice, that's the immigration.
Service.
Customs is underneath the Treasury Department, just like O'Hara, U.S. Treasury is part of the Treasury Department.
Right.
All right, money. Now, here's the big
Money.
one. Now, first of all, let's get back to the cars a minute. We talked to inspector, but you're the one that does this. What happens when a car comes down and they find some money in the car? All right, you got it, and it's a deliberate violation. Why is it a violation first?
Okay. Well, the law requires that if a person is coming into the United States and they are bringing with them currency of more than $10,000, currency, they must declare that amount of currency to the customs inspector as they arrive at the border. When they declare that currency to the customs inspector, he will hand them a form which will be a declaration on which they list their name, their address, and so on, and the amount of money, the amount of currency that they're bringing into the United States. The amount is verified, and it agrees to the declaration, it's fine.
Do they have to explain what they're going to do with the money, why they're bringing it in? Do they ask them that?
No, they don't.
They don't ask them
No,
that.
they
All
don't.
right.
The amount has to agree with what they have declared, which they have written on the form. Now, there is no duty or no tax put on that money. It is just a requirement that the currency, the money itself, be declared. If they declare $1 million and they put it on that declaration, they can bring in $1 million in cash. If they fail to declare $1 million, then it's subject to seizure by the United States.
And lost.
Customs.
They lose it.
That's correct. What happens is that it's seized. We initiate action to forfeit it, which means it turns over to the possession of the United States government.
Let's stop for just a minute. I don't hate to interrupt you, but people out there are going to say, he don't hate to interrupt you, not at all. But when you are brought in and the money is found, you get into the picture? Is that when you get into the picture?
That's right.
Right.
One of my agents will.
Okay, they get over it. They get over it. Now, what happens physically? State police are called. What happens to the people that night? Do they go to jail? What happens physically when they find the money after they found it? And they're still at the border.
An investigation begins.
Okay.
The customs inspector notifies this office, and a special agent responds. If it's after hours, an agent is on call, he will respond to the port of entry. The customs inspector explains to the agent exactly what has transpired. He has found this money. It was not declared. Where was it found? How was it found? What questions were asked of the individual who had the money? What the responses were, if any, and such were made. All right. The facts are very quickly analyzed by the agent. He re-interviews the individual who was found in possession of the money. Now, if the money is on the person of the individual, there's an explanation that's required, which would be a little different than the money found in the car, depending on where in the car the money is found. Was the money concealed? Was it in the open? Was a special compartment built into the car that would be used to hold this money? Would the individual have owned that car, or perhaps rented it, or borrowed it? All that enters into the picture, and it has to be deciphered by the investigative agent, and he makes a call that he believes the individual carrying this or transporting this money is probably guilty of a violation. At that point, he consults with the United States Attorney, who is the prosecuting officer for the federal government.
Is he in the area?
Now, this is done by telephone, because the nearest
Okay.
U.S. Attorney's office is in Albany, New York.
And it's 2 o'clock in the morning?
And it's 2 o'clock in the
They
morning.
still call him.
And we wake him up.
Okay. All right.
If we can wake up he can wake up. All right?
And that's one of the best parts of the evening right there.
Right. That's right. So we confer with the U.S. Attorney, explain the facts. He makes the decision whether or not to have the individual arrested. He feels that the facts warrant it. If an arrest takes place, we tell the individual of his constitutional rights. He's placed under arrest, usually put in handcuffs, and transported to the nearest available jail facility.
If you have not arrested him yet, you don't have to give him his Miranda warning until you arrest him? Is that the idea?
No, we give him, as soon as we suspect
Yes.
that he's been involved in a violation and that he's responsible for that violation, we give him his Miranda rights, because we're detaining him and holding him to that location until he finishes with our questioning.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and hear more about the Miranda warnings. I'm sure you've seen it on all your police shows, and you've seen it in movies, and we're going to find a little bit more about the police. That's an important thing. I don't know if it's right or not, but it's very important. If you don't do it, it can throw the whole case out, I believe. But I believe you'll stay tuned. Please come back. You're watching Hometown Cable. What's going on here? John O'Hara is our guest this morning. We were talking about money, John, and what happens to money when you find money in a car. You found the money now. They hadn't been declared. And what happens to the money? What happens to the car?
Well, the money can be seized. Depends on the violation. If it was an intentional, okay, we can move either civilly or we can move criminally. Once the money is officially seized by United States Customs, that money can then, through a process, be forfeited to the U.S. Treasury Department. Now, if we are working this investigation, and working the investigation with us happens to be a BCI investigator, New York State Police, or an officer from the Plattsburgh Police Department or the County Sheriff's Department, there is a program in effect now with the federal government called asset sharing. And what that means is we can turn over to the assisting agency up to 80% of the currency that we have seized.
As a reward?
Well, as a result of their assisting us in this investigation.
You can give money
Correct.
for doing their job to another law enforcement agency, city, town, or state, and you give them money.
That's correct. That's correct. Because in assisting us in this particular case, it takes them away to a certain degree of other state or city laws that they should be doing right at that time. A degree of compensation is, since you did, you're assisting us, you're entitled to it, and it flows back to the state treasury.
Okay, not to the individual.
Oh, no.
No, right? That's make
goes
sure
to
that.
the state agency.
To the state agency or the city police
Correct.
or something like
County.
that. Well, they must be waiting up down there with bated breath to tell you information so they can get this to help their coffers.
It's been a very successful program. We have had a lot of cooperation from agencies who have taken advantage of this program, and as I think of it now, the New York State Police have received asset sharing funds. The sheriff, Clinton County, the Malone Police Department.
This is money that has got by the border and for some reason picked up later. I can recall one came through Champlain and they said they stopped at the one of the gas stations just near the Route 11, and they were checking the oil or something, and there's piles of money around the motor, around the fenders in there, and they said, "My gosh, look at the money!" And so they went inside and they called the customs, and before they got to Plattsburgh, the Border Patrol had picked them up.
The case is even where if the city of Plattsburgh were to come to us or the New York State Police and identify to U.S. Customs an individual who might be involved in either drugs or smuggling of currency, if that initiates our investigation and we subsequently make a seizure of currency, they are entitled to 80% of that. The rationale being we would not have targeted that particular individual if he had not been referred to us by another law enforcement agency.
We know, I think we who watch the TV shows, the movies, how the police or law enforcement agencies are very concerned that they don't make mistakes along the way, that where the facts are true, but because they didn't do certain things, it's thrown out. This happens often, I understand, right?
That's correct.
Not infrequently. And there's a thing called the Miranda Declaration. What is the Miranda Declaration, or reading his rights? What does that mean?
Well, the Miranda warning, as it's referred to, is basically certain constitutional rights which are the entitlement of everyone here in the United States, all right? And before arrest can be effected of an individual, the individual has a right to constitutional privileges, and you have to tell him what these rights are. If you do not advise him of these constitutional rights, all right, anything that he says or does after that particular point cannot be used, normally cannot be used as evidence against him in a court of law. So you can throw out statements, admissions, certain things that have been referenced because he was not informed of his constitutional rights, which in effect were Miranda. Now, Miranda was a case in the southwestern part of the United States, and that case was appealed up through the Supreme Court, and that's why they refer to it as Miranda. He was the defendant that reversed his conviction based on the fact that he was not, he did not receive his constitutional rights. He was eventually killed in a fight in a bar.
So when, but his law didn't go out.
No,
That's been
it's with us today.
Yes, and I think it's a thing that the law enforcement has to be very, very careful that they follow completely. And when did you tell us when? Because we talked about it a little bit off camera. I'm a little, don't remember whether it was then or now. Did you tell us when you have to give him that Miranda? When you have to warn him that anything you say can be used against you? In other words, don't tell me anything more when I ask you my questions. Don't answer them. That's what you're telling him.
Yes, we have to tell him that. And what that means is, once we have identified that individual and associated with him that there is a probability he has violated a law, at that point, we give him his Miranda warning.
Even before the arrest?
It can be, correct.
Could be ahead of the arrest. And you tell him, now, don't tell me anything more when I ask you the questions. Don't answer. You can if you want, but they'll be used against you.
Yeah.
And, if your lawyer was here, he'd tell you not to answer. That's basically
correct.
what you're telling him.
That's correct. That's correct. And as strange as it may seem, people still do tell us and make admissions after we tell them
Don't
that.
people like to tell it when they've done it, John, sometimes?
I think so.
It cleanses their souls or something?
Yes,
I think they want to tell you they feel better about it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell when a person's lying?
Sometimes, not all the time, but after you've talked to thousands of people along the same lines of smuggling with standard questions, and you get standard responses, the response is different. It alerts you.
They make some very stupid lying sometimes too.
Very much.
So obvious.
So obvious. So obvious. Yes, it really does.
Really are. Yes. What else do you do besides work, John? Are you into any other? You donate your time? I saw a plaque here that was on your wall, which I took the opportunity to take, and it says a federal employee point of light certificate. What's that? What's this is all about?
Well, back in April of last year, I received from President Bush through the Commissioner of Customs this citation as a point of light award, which is given in appreciation for community services, volunteer work. And I live in Vermont, and over in Vermont, I became active in a state-run court diversion program, which is volunteer, and also a housing rehab program. The court diversion program is a program whereby you take first-time violators in an offense. Rather than go through court, they are sent to a panel. You sit on this panel. It's a volunteer thing. You set up a program whereby They will make retribution. They will change their ways, and they're given actually a contract, and they have to fulfill this contract within a period of time. And at that time, if they do meet all the demands of the contract, the criminal record is wiped clean. They no longer have it.
I thought as a law enforcement officer that you'd want to hang everybody.
No,
Is that true?
I don't think so. I've enjoyed my work in that program, and it gives people a new.
They make mistakes, you're saying?
Yes, they do. Yeah, they do. We all do, and it's good to help them. And it's shown us where people don't repeat when they're given an opportunity. It does help them.
There's a letter from the Commissioner of Customs, Carol Hallett, April 22nd, 1992. Matter of fact, a year before you're going to retire, just about.
Just about a year.
And your willingness to help others in need is the American way for neighbors to help neighbors. President's word, kinder and gentler nation, etc. Keep up the good work, and that's very nice, John. These things will be going with you. I think it would be your home.
I'll have to find some room someplace, Bob.
All right. So that there are a lot of people out there. If you're looking at anybody who's going up who are watching our young people, the older people who have children that go north, be very careful what car they're in, what they're bringing back, what they're bringing up. They can get themselves in a lot of trouble unknowingly.
Unknowingly.
Correct?
It's true.
Even when you're bringing back your video camera, it's a good idea to register it when you go up, because if it's brand new, it'll be hard to convince somebody unless you got the bill of sale that you bought it down here. These are innocent things that can cause you a lot of trouble.
Correct.
All
That's
right?
correct.
And don't forget to stop at the border, and when they ask you if anything to declare, that means whether you bought it, acquired it, someone gave it to you, or whatever. You got it as a wedding present. You have to declare it. You may not pay duty, but you got to declare it. If the money is found in a car, in my car, but it's his money, it's Calvin's money, can they seize my car? Because he's in my car with it, and I knew it?
The car, in all probability, would be seized.
Subject, all right. It's
Subject to seize. All right. It could be seized, not necessarily forfeited to the United States government. The investigative agent would look into the case and make a determination as to the responsibility you, as the owner of that car, played in this particular venture. If there was no association with you in the case of smuggling of the money, the car would be returned to you.
So that seizure and what's the
Forfeiture.
other? Forfeiture is not the same thing.
No,
There's a time between.
No. That's correct.
Okay, now
That's correct.
there is a thing called mitigating circumstances.
Correct.
That a person that's arrested for anything coming through here, well, not arrested, but seized, you seize his merchandise, he has a right to appeal to get it back.
He has a right to explain to
What
file a
happened,
petition.
it's called mitigating circumstances, because maybe that you got a dying child or whatever, but he has a right. You have how many days for that?
Well, he has up to
60,
30.
30?
Well, it's 30 days usually, and it can be extended for another 30.
And you can write 2-3 pages as to what happened. As a matter of fact, the night you're here and anything is seized, they ask you to give an explanation in writing that right away.
Correct.
Of what happened and why this happened.
That
and why
way it doesn't drag out. Do it right away. And it can be in letter form,
yes,
a note form. It does not have to be in a specific
and then you can
legal
enlarge
document.
on that later, right?
That's correct.
You don't need to get an attorney,
Yep.
because I think that even though they're law enforcement, this is a father, a husband, a loving person, that and there are people like him above him who make these decisions, that there are honest mistakes, correct? And you're not here to crucify anybody. Absolutely not.
We have a job to do, and we have that responsibility. We do it. The people who work for United States Customs in this area, they live in the community. They're raising children. They're going to church. They're going to schools. So they're a part of the community. They don't want to do this.
John, while we were here, a man came in and gave you a picture. You may not want to show the picture because there's certain faces in there that belong to a new organization, and you may not want to know who's in there.
Right.
But you want to tell us what that organization is? What is this that took place?
Well, this picture was really a ceremony which
there's 10 people
came about here. It's 10 people, and they all are customs officers, New York State police officers, and Plattsburgh police officers. They are bestowing on me.
He's getting a picture out of it.
The plaque, which you see here on the wall, which was given to me in appreciation for the assistance and the work we gave and rendered to the New York State Police drug unit out of Raybrook, and I was quite pleased by receiving it.
It's a beautiful thing. Now, there's a group now that's made up of inspectors, agents, import specialists, state police, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we have two groups here in the investigative office here at Rouse's Point. One is a quasi task force, as we're referring to it, and that force consists of agents from this office, together with BCI investigators, New York State Police, officers from the Plattsburgh Police Department. We are about to add representatives of the Immigration Naturalization Service, the U.S. Border Patrol, and probably the County Sheriff's Department. What we will do is we will initiate investigations on a broad spectrum, utilizing the experience and the availability of all these people to zero in on criminal acts, usually traversing the border in this particular area. That group will consist probably of about 9 people. Mm-hmm. We at the present time also have a field intelligence unit, which is located on the first floor here of the 9B, and it consists of customs inspectors from the St. Alban and Ogdensburg districts. We have import specialists from the Ogdensburg and St. Albans district. We have a Canadian customs officer assigned to it. We have a Quebec provincial police officer assigned to it. We had, up until a little while ago, members of the National Guard from the state of New York. And we disseminate intelligence information throughout the basically New England area and the northern tier of New York, joining with our Canadian counterparts.
John, there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this may be cut very short because I don't know how much of this you can tell me. And that's about early warning devices along the Canadian border, Mexican border. Obviously, you can't have a man within sight of every other one standing on the border, you or customs, to watch what's being brought across the border, be it people, animals, drugs, or anything else. But there's radar that's still in effect. I don't know, radar. There's flying balloons. There's aircraft. There's snowmobiles up and down the border. There's alerts. Can you tell us anything about any of those on a limited or otherwise scale right now?
Well, I can tell you generally.
Okay, just general. I don't want to get you in trouble here, but just give it, because there's a lot of things being done here. So be careful when you go through a border by mistake. Don't just turn around and come back because you've been recorded, possibly, right?
That's correct. We do have all these items that you just mentioned, and in addition to that, we have closed circuit television, which are on the scene at various border crossings. A lot of these units are mobile. They're put on location for a period of time, and then they're moved from one to the other. At this time, I couldn't tell you where they are on location. We also use, and so does the United States Border Patrol, they use what we call ground sensors. And these sensors indicate movement, usually of personnel, into a given area, and are picked up by sound and vibration. They also are mobile. We move these from location to location to location. We have people that sit on certain roads, maintain surveillance of certain roads.
What about
informants? People that
I was going to say, what about people who live in houses along the border?
Yeah, people tell us.
There's only one road coming down. It could be a mile down the road, and that car comes down.
We get calls from people, John Q. Public, the citizens who think somebody is using their road, maybe to smuggle contraband.
Right. What about these balloons? Anything you can tell me about these balloons?
Well, we do have aerostats, which are located in the southwestern part of the United States and off of the Florida Keys. We don't have any on location up here at the present time. They are equipped with radar, and their primary concern is to detect low-flying aircraft used by smugglers to fly in from Mexico and, of course, the Gulf of Mexico, South America into Florida. And
they're tied with a rope that.
They're anchored to the ground by cables. Mm-hmm. They are subject to weather, though. They can be damaged by weather. They have to be lowered. They're very easy to observe. If you're coming up in an airplane, you certainly can see this thing at 300-400 feet.
Yeah. John, I can't wiretap a telephone. I can't wiretap Calvin if he and I don't get along and I want to find out what he's saying on a telephone. And you can't either, even in law enforcement. You can't tap a telephone without an authorization.
That's correct.
But that can be obtained with reason through a judge? Is that what happens?
Well, that's what happened. You have to go to a court, or in some cases to a United States attorney. We don't have to take it to the court level. But we have to present them with documentation or testimony, evidence, that would lead us to believe that that conversation is supportive of an illegal act having taken place or will take place. And in order for us to interdict that illegal act, we have to find out what that conversation is saying. So therefore we can interject into a citizen's private rights to telephone conversation or person-to-person conversation, but it's tough to do. It's not easy.
We've been talking this morning with John O'Hara, the officer in charge of Law Office of Enforcement around this point. Our attempt here today was not to tell you everything so that you could take a test on what his office does, because there's an awful lot. We hope he's able to inform you of the various things that take place, that many of it you don't ever see his men, and if you do, you don't know who they are. They're out there, they're doing their job every day, enforcing the laws of the United States, making sure that it's taken, and it's a big office here. It's well noted across the United States. The men have gone on for promotions, and we hope that you've enjoyed this. We haven't had the props to show like we normally do, which makes a program many times more interesting. But you don't have much that you see, like a bunch of pipes. You have a bunch of pipes or any of the... You used to have a big diagram you brought to the... You still have those type of things?
We used to keep it. We don't have it anymore, Bob. We've turned most of that stuff over to the district director for his display.
Yeah.
The stuff that we have on location is evidence. It's under a chain of custody. It's locked up in a safe. And basically most of that is narcotics. Because once it fits its mood, for the trial... We eliminate it, we send it to the lab, and they destroy it.
Do you remember the telephone that I was talking to you about before?
I do
a little bit about it. Can you talk anything about that? What I remember, one of the agents here showed me, they seized from a young person coming through, just a regular little telephone, a little push-button thing, that my understanding was you could attach it to your telephone, and by pushing certain numbers, you could place yourself in any city you're calling. And from then on, it was a local call. Do you remember? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, we did. It was seized in a drug smuggling investigation we conducted, and it belonged to one of the violators. In those particular cases, when we seize equipment like that, sophisticated electronic equipment, there is a provision whereby we, the seizing agency, can lay claim to that piece of equipment. We can turn it around and use it in our investigation to support cases and pursue cases as well.
Let's say that you wanted to call San Francisco and didn't want to pay for the call. With this little gadget that this man had, you could put it near your phone and push in the area code, let's say 809 in California, all right? And then the next three numbers, and you would be in the San Francisco area without interruption of the local telephone call, and it then became a local call just like you were in San Francisco. And you could call all over the world with this little thing. And, of course, what is happening, and I think you may have seen it on 2020 or one of the other programs, they're using them in the cities now, and they're saying if you want to call anybody in the United States for $5, talk as long as you want, and they stand in these train terminals or airplane terminals, and they put it next to the phone, and they dial your number for you, and you pay them $5, and the guy talks forever. Telephone company is not involved at all. And I thought that was a very interesting, but that's no longer here.
No, it's no longer, and it's defrauding the telephone company of revenue that they should be receiving, and we get into a lot of that kind of stuff. We get into a lot of counterfeit things as well.
Okay. Counterfeit money?
Counterfeit money is a big item that we seize here on the border between Montreal and New York. People come down and disperse the counterfeit bills in local business establishments, motels, hotels, gas stations. Further down, the Saratoga area, racetracks are a big place for disseminating counterfeit money.
It goes quick there, yes. John, thank you very much for your time this morning.
I've enjoyed it
very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I got one question.
Yes.
Are there rewards for the public?
Are there rewards for the public?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. The United States Customs Service will pay rewards for information we receive which results in the seizure or an arrest of an individual violating a federal law. So anybody that has information out there is encouraged to call any local customs office and report that to them, and if there is a reward involved, they'll get it. And we've done that in the past.
Is there a problem here of a neighbor antagonizing his other neighbor by giving you a false information and cause that guy an awful lot of anguish? Does that ever happen?
That happens.
But then they're subject to penalty too.
Oh yeah, that's right. For making a false claim.
Yes.
You're right. They're subject to a penalty as well. And but I have to say that any piece of information we get is not automatically acted upon. It's looked into and it's reviewed before we decide to target somebody. So we appreciate the call. We sincerely look forward to it. But if you have in your mind that you want to antagonize somebody, forget about it, because we can turn it around on you.
Okay, that's important, I think, because you heard of spite fences between
Absolutely.
Neighbors, and
Absolutely.
this would be another way to spite a neighbor or a former friend or whatever, or a former spouse, particularly, maybe,
That could happen too.
That's what
That
a
could
great,
happen
a
too.
lot of, as a matter of fact, a lot of the tips, as I remember when I was working at Customs, came from a former spouse who's reporting her husband comes through pretty regularly with something, or his wife comes through regularly, and be on the lookout.
Most of those tips have been reliable.
Oh yes, they know. That's a lot of the income tax tips come that way too. Well, John, I hope you enjoy your retirement as much as you have your job here, and I hope we'll see you maybe even more than we have in the past few years here over at your beautiful home over in Alberg. And give us your best to your wife. I've never met your son, but I'll see him at your retirement party. I take it.
That. Yes, he'll be there. He'll be there.
Anything else in closing?
No, I certainly want to thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get on the television and explain to people just what the United States Customs does, and from our viewpoint of the investigative division, it's a good office. The people who will be here after I'm gone. Kind of like Allstate, you're in good hands.
All right. This is the third in a series that we hope most of the agencies along the border. We've yet to try to talk to the Border Patrol or the separate, and then the Immigration and possibly General Services Administration, who own the buildings that you're in here now. Matter of fact, just in closing, I can remember when I worked in this building back in the early 60s, there were prison cells upstairs here with the bars on the back windows, where they used to put somebody overnight or a couple of days while investigation was being done.
Yeah, we don't do that anymore.
Don't do that anymore. You get them right out of here,
Clinton County Jail, put them in.
The best part of the whole thing, I understand from our talk, is calling the U.S. Marshal in the middle of the night. The U.S. Attorney in the middle of the night down in Albany, New York, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, you've been watching Hometown Cable. What's going on here? I'm Bob Ben. John O'Hara is our guest today, United States Office of Enforcement. He's the officer, what is it called? The special agent in charge. And Calvin Castine's on the camera, Mr. Hometown Cable himself. Thanks for tuning in. And remember, if you're not already a patron of this Hometown Cable, please become one and keep this type of program